It all started on a chilly October evening in my little suburban house in Maplewood, New Jersey. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping chamomile tea and flipping through an old photo album when the doorbell rang. It was late, too late for visitors. But something told me it wasn't just another Jehovah's Witness or a nosy neighbor selling cookies. When I opened the door, there he stood, my son Ethan. His arms were crossed, his jaw tight, and his eyes avoided mine like they always did when he had bad news to deliver. "Mom," he said flatly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." He didn't even take off his coat as he strode into the living room, leaving muddy footprints on my freshly cleaned carpet. My heart sank before he even spoke the words. But when he finally said them, "You either pay back what you owe me or you get out of this house," I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. How could my own child, the boy I raised alone after his father walked out on us, say such a thing? That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Ethan's voice echoing in my head. Pay up or get out. Was this really how low we'd sunk? I thought about the loan he gave me years ago, right after my husband passed away. At the time, I was drowning in medical bills and funeral costs. Ethan offered to help, but now it seemed less like generosity and more like a transaction. One he clearly expected me to honor no matter the cost. The next morning, I packed my things quietly, careful not to wake the ghosts of memories that lingered in every corner of the house. As I loaded boxes into my beat-up Honda Civic, I caught sight of Ethan watching me from the window. There was no sadness in his expression, no regret, just cold indifference. And that hurt more than anything else. Driving away from the home I'd lived in for over 2 decades felt like losing a piece of myself. My new apartment was tiny, a 1-bedroom shoebox above a bakery downtown, but it had character. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow, and the scent of fresh bread wafted through the air every morning. So it wasn't home. One day while unpacking yet another box of forgotten mementos, I met Lila. She was my neighbor, a sprightly woman in her 70s with silver hair and a penchant for painting abstract art. Lila invited me over for coffee and we ended up talking for hours. She listened intently as I recounted everything that had happened with Ethan. "Sometimes people forget where they came from," she said gently, stirring sugar into her mug. "But holding on to anger won't fix anything. It'll only eat you alive." Her words stuck with me, though I wasn't ready to forgive Ethan just yet. Not after the way he treated me. A few weeks later, I ran into an old friend at the grocery store. Her name was Carol and she knew both me and Ethan well. Over frozen peas and canned soup, she casually mentioned that Ethan had been telling people around town that I was irresponsible with money. That I squandered his generous gift instead of using it wisely. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Irresponsible? After all the sacrifices I made to give him a decent upbringing? Sure, I wasn't perfect. I worked long hours as a waitress and sometimes missed school events. But I did the best I could. Anger bubbled inside me hot and sharp. I wanted to confront Ethan, to scream at him until he understood how much his words hurt. But then I remembered something Lila once said, "Actions speak louder than words." Maybe it was time I showed Ethan exactly who I was, and what I was capable of. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through some old papers, I stumbled upon a document I hadn't seen in years. It was a letter from Ethan's estranged father, addressed to me shortly before his death. In it, he revealed that he'd left a substantial inheritance to Ethan, not me. The amount was staggering, enough to set anyone up for life. Yet Ethan had never breathed a word of it to me. At first I felt betrayed all over again. Why hadn't he told me? Did he think I wouldn't understand? Or worse, did he assume I'd ask for a share? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. If Ethan could keep secrets like that, then maybe he deserved everything coming his way. For the first time since moving out, I allowed myself to imagine a plan, not just to survive but to fight back. With Lila's encouragement, I began digging deeper into Ethan's life. Through mutual acquaintances and a bit of sleuthing online, I uncovered some troubling details about his real estate business. Turns out he wasn't as squeaky clean as he pretended to be. There were whispers of falsified property records, shady deals, and unhappy clients. Armed with this information, I decided to strike. I anonymously tipped off the local authorities, sending them copies of emails and documents I'd gathered. Then I sat back and waited, watching as the dominoes began to fall. Ethan had no idea who was behind it, or so I thought. Little did I know, my actions would come back to haunt me in ways I never anticipated. It didn't take long for the storm to hit. One evening as I sat in my tiny apartment nursing a cup of tea, I heard the distant wail of sirens. My heart skipped a beat. Lila knocked on my door moments later, her face pale. "Martha," she said breathlessly, "they're at Ethan's office downtown. Police cars everywhere." She hesitated before adding, "Do you think?" I didn't answer her directly. Instead, I turned off the lights and peeked out the window, watching as news vans began to gather like vultures circling their prey. The next morning, headlines screamed across every local paper. "Local real estate mogul under investigation for fraud." Ethan's name was plastered everywhere, along with grainy photos of him leaving his office in handcuffs. Part of me felt vindicated. Finally, he was getting what he deserved. But another part felt hollow. This wasn't just revenge, it was destruction. And I had set the wheels in motion. Ethan tried to reach out to me almost immediately. His calls came flooding in one after another until I silenced my phone altogether. Eventually, he showed up at my doorstep unannounced, looking haggard and desperate. He pleaded with me to help him, claiming that someone was framing him. "Mom, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "You know me better than this. I wouldn't do something like that." For a moment I almost believed him. Almost. But then I remembered all the times he'd lied to me, the inheritance he kept hidden, the rumors he spread about me being reckless with money. I couldn't trust him anymore. So instead of offering comfort, I played along, pretending to consider his request while secretly gathering more evidence against him. Each conversation we had became another thread in the web I was weaving around him. Things escalated quickly. Clients started pulling out of deals left and right, and Ethan's business partners distanced themselves from him entirely. Rumors spread like wildfire, painting him as a con artist who preyed on vulnerable buyers. His once flourishing career crumbled into dust within weeks. One night during one of our tense reconciliation meetings, Ethan snapped. He accused me of orchestrating the entire scandal, spitting out accusations like venom. "How could you do this to your own son?" he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "After everything I've done for you." That last line stung the most because it wasn't true, not really. He hadn't done anything for me unless there was something in it for him. Still, hearing those words made me question whether I'd gone too far. Was I any better than him? The confrontation ended with Ethan storming out of the cafe where we'd met, leaving behind a trail of shattered glass from the coffee mug he'd thrown in anger. I sat there numbly, staring at the mess he'd left behind, both literal and metaphorical. Later that week, I decided it was time to end the charade. I called him over to my apartment under the pretense of making amends. When he arrived, I handed him a folder containing every piece of evidence I'd gathered against him. His face went white as he flipped through the documents, realizing exactly how thoroughly I'd dismantled his life. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I wanted to tell him it was justice, that he'd brought this upon himself. But deep down I knew it wasn't just about fairness, it was about pain. The media frenzy surrounding Ethan's downfall reached a fever pitch. Reporters camped outside his building, snapping photos of him looking disheveled and defeated. Friends and colleagues abandoned him, unwilling to be associated with someone tainted by scandal. Even his girlfriend of 3 years broke up with him, citing irreconcilable differences. Watching it all unfold felt surreal. On one hand, I was satisfied. I'd proven that no one could treat me the way Ethan had and get away with it. On the other hand, guilt gnawed at me relentlessly. Late at night, when the world was quiet, I found myself replaying memories of Ethan as a child. His laughter, his hugs, the way he used to cling to me whenever he was scared. Those moments seemed so distant now, buried beneath layers of bitterness and betrayal. With Ethan's reputation in ruins, I moved back into the family home. Legal proceedings were swift. Thanks to the evidence I provided, the court ruled in my favor, granting me full ownership of the property. It should have been a triumphant return, but stepping inside felt bittersweet. The house was eerily silent without Ethan's presence, even though I hated to admit it. Lila helped me settle back in, rearranging furniture and hanging new curtains to give the place a fresh start. Yet no matter how much we changed, the memories lingered. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me of Ethan running through the halls as a boy. Every shadow seemed to whisper, "What have you done?" I tried to push those thoughts aside, focusing instead on reclaiming my independence. But the emptiness inside me grew harder to ignore. Living alone in the big house gave me plenty of time to reflect. At first, I convinced myself that I'd done the right thing, that Ethan needed to learn accountability. But as days turned into weeks, doubts crept in. Had I truly sought justice, or had I simply allowed my anger to consume me? I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made for Ethan, all the nights I worked double shifts just to keep food on the table. And yet here we were, estranged and broken beyond repair. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, I stumbled upon a photo album filled with pictures of Ethan as a child. There he was, grinning ear to ear at his 5th birthday party, clutching a toy car I'd saved up months to buy. Another photo showed us baking cookies together, flour smeared across his cheeks. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized how much I missed him. Not the man he'd become, but the boy he used to be. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, an unexpected visitor showed up at my door. Greg, one of Ethan's former business associates. He looked nervous, shifting uncomfortably as he explained why he was there. "I know you're behind the investigation," he said bluntly. "But not everything they're saying about Ethan is true." According to Greg, some of the allegations stemmed from honest mistakes made by Ethan's team, not deliberate fraud. Worse still, certain key pieces of evidence had been fabricated by a rival broker hoping to eliminate competition. "If you come forward with what you know," Greg urged, "you might be able to clear his name partially. Maybe enough to salvage something." I stared at him, stunned. Could it be possible that I'd misjudged Ethan? Or worse, that I'd been manipulated into destroying him completely? Greg's words haunted me for days. I couldn't stop thinking about the possibility that I'd been wrong, that Ethan wasn't entirely to blame for the mess he was in. It gnawed at me like a splinter buried deep beneath my skin. I replayed every interaction we'd had since the scandal broke, searching for signs that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't deserved everything that happened to him. But then doubt crept back in. Even if some of the accusations were exaggerated or false, didn't Ethan still have it coming? He'd treated me like a burden, an inconvenience to be discarded when I no longer served his purposes. And what about the inheritance he hid from me? That alone proved he wasn't the selfless son I once believed him to be. Still, Greg's offer lingered in my mind. If I came forward with the truth, could I undo some of the damage? Or would it only make things worse? After sleepless nights and endless internal debates, I made my choice. I decided not to intervene. Not because I didn't care about Ethan, I did. But because I feared that clearing his name even partially would erase the lesson he so desperately needed to learn. He had spent years building his empire on shaky foundations, cutting corners and prioritizing profit over integrity. Maybe losing everything was the wake-up call he required to become a better person. Still, making that decision didn't bring me peace. Instead, it left me feeling hollow, as though I'd traded one kind of loss for another. I tried to distract myself by throwing myself into fixing up the house, painting walls and planting flowers in the garden. But no matter how hard I worked, the silence in the house echoed louder than ever. Meanwhile, Ethan's life continued to spiral out of control. With his business in shambles and his reputation in tatters, he sold off most of his possessions to cover legal fees and debts. The proud, confident man I once knew disappeared, replaced by someone who looked broken and defeated. One day, while shopping at the grocery store, I overheard 2 women whispering about him. "Did you hear? He's living in a motel now," one said. "Can't believe how far he fell." Their words stung not because they were cruel but because they were true. For all my anger and resentment, seeing Ethan reduced to this state filled me with a sadness I couldn't shake. I wanted to hate him, to convince myself that he got exactly what he deserved. But I couldn't. Beneath the bitterness there was still love. And that made everything infinitely more painful. Living in the family home again should have felt like reclaiming a piece of my past, but instead, it only highlighted how much had changed. The quiet evenings that used to bring me comfort now felt suffocating. Without Ethan's presence or anyone else's, the house felt like a museum frozen in time. I threw myself into volunteering at the local community center, hoping to fill the void inside me. Helping others gave me a sense of purpose, but it wasn't enough to silence the questions swirling in my mind. Had I gone too far? Could I have handled things differently? These thoughts followed me everywhere, shadowing my steps like ghosts I couldn't escape. Months passed before Ethan attempted to reach out to me again. When he finally did, it wasn't through angry phone calls or dramatic confrontations. It was a simple letter handwritten and mailed to my address. In it, he apologized sincerely for everything, for treating me like a burden, for keeping secrets, for letting pride blind him to the pain he caused. Reading those words brought tears to my eyes. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to invite him back into my life and start over. But fear held me back. What if nothing had really changed? What if forgiving him meant opening myself up to more hurt? I wrote him a response, telling him I appreciated his apology but needed time to process everything. Deep down, though, I worried that time might never come. Just when I thought I'd reached the end of this tangled web, another twist sent shockwaves through my world. Lila called me one afternoon, her voice shaking. "Martha, there's something you need to see," she said urgently. She showed up at my door minutes later, holding a newspaper article that chilled me to the bone. The headline read, "Rival broker admits to framing local real estate agent." According to the report, the rival broker who'd targeted Ethan had confessed to fabricating key pieces of evidence against him. While Ethan wasn't entirely innocent, he'd indeed cut corners in several deals. The extent of the fraud allegations had been grossly exaggerated. My hands trembled as I read the article, guilt crashing over me like a tidal wave. I had played right into someone else's scheme, destroying my son's life based on lies. Now, sitting here in the dim light of my living room, surrounded by shadows and silence, I can't help but wonder if it's too late to fix what I've broken. Ethan hasn't responded to my last letter, and I don't blame him. How do you apologize for something like this? How do you rebuild trust when the foundation has crumbled completely? All I know is that revenge may feel sweet in the moment, but its bitterness lingers long after the initial rush fades. Sometimes the price of pride is higher than anyone should ever have to pay. Days turned into weeks and Ethan's silence became deafening. I called him repeatedly, left voicemails, sent texts, anything to get through, but he never responded. Each unanswered attempt felt like another nail in the coffin of our relationship. I couldn't blame him for shutting me out. After everything I'd done, I wouldn't have trusted me either. But that didn't make it hurt any less. I started replaying every decision I'd made, dissecting each moment where I could have chosen differently. What if I had confronted Ethan instead of plotting behind his back? What if I had listened to Greg sooner, before the damage was irreversible? The what-ifs tormented me, keeping me awake at night. One evening, as I sat alone in the darkened living room, I realized something terrifying. I had become the very thing I despised. A person driven by anger and pride, blind to the consequences of their actions. Then came the letter that shattered whatever hope I had left. It arrived in a plain white envelope, addressed in Ethan's familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, bracing myself for what I might find inside. The words were brief but devastating. "Mom, I've decided to leave Maplewood. I need a fresh start somewhere far away from here, and from everything that's happened. Don't try to find me." There was no signature, no plea for reconciliation, just cold finality. I read it over and over, hoping to find some hidden meaning, some glimmer of forgiveness or closure. But there was none. Ethan was gone, and this time he wasn't coming back. In desperation, I tried reaching out to mutual friends, asking if anyone knew where Ethan had gone. No one did, or if they did, they weren't telling me. Finally, I turned to Lila, who listened patiently as I poured out my heart. "You can't undo the past," she said gently, placing a hand on mine. "But you can still choose how you move forward." Her words stuck with me, though they offered little comfort. To honor what remained of my fractured family, I donated part of the proceeds from selling Ethan's childhood belongings to a local charity for single mothers. It was a small gesture, but it gave me a fleeting sense of purpose. Still, the emptiness inside me refused to fade. Months later, I'm sitting in the same chair where this whole nightmare began, staring at the empty walls of the house that once held so many memories. Outside, autumn leaves swirl in the wind, painting the ground in shades of gold and crimson. The world keeps moving, oblivious to the weight pressing down on my chest. Every now and then, I catch myself imagining what Ethan is doing, whether he's happy, whether he thinks about me. I'll never know. All I have are the photos tucked away in a box upstairs, the ones I can't bear to look at anymore. They remind me too much of what I lost, not just because of Ethan's choices, but because of mine. As I sit here, surrounded by silence, I realize the truth. Revenge doesn't heal wounds, it creates new ones. Love should have been my anchor, but instead I let pride steer me toward ruin. Now all that's left is regret and the bitter taste of lessons learned too late.